Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges and I'll be reviewing a truly fascinating film called Agora. Set during the last days of the Roman Empire, this is the incredible story of a very special woman called Hypatia. In a world dominated by men, she was one of the very few women considered equal amongst her peers, making her mark upon the world as a mathematician, a philosopher, and an astronomer. Her life's work was dedicated simply to the pursuit of wisdom, but she lived in a pivotal moment in time when the ancient world she knew came crashing down around her, and a new era of history was about to begin. This is Agora. For those of you who haven't seen Agora or don't know much about the real Hypatia, I feel that in order to tell her story, we would have to start with the city she lived in, Alexandria, one of the most important cities in antiquity. If Athens was the birthplace of democracy and Rome's power was built upon its military strength, then Alexandria was founded by knowledge. And it was Alexander the Great himself who envisioned it. During his conquest of the Persian Empire, he arrived in Egypt and was seen by the Egyptians not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. His open-minded approach to their religion and customs made him beloved by the natives, so much so they declared him Pharaoh, a living god on earth. However, it was Alexander's wish to make his new divine status irrefutable, and one that would last throughout the centuries. The pharaohs of old had their great pyramids. Alexander the Great wanted a city, one of many to come that would bear his name, and that city was Alexandria. Now, unlike traditional Egyptian cities which were founded up and down the Nile, Alexander wanted his to be located on the coast. And the reason for this was because Alexander wanted to look out across the Mediterranean Sea towards his homeland of Greece and Macedonia. He also wanted to make his new Egyptian capital a center for trade and commerce, which also benefited from the easy-to-access overland route linking it from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Needless to say, this city boomed from this decision, and the wealth of Asia flowed back to Greece. However, Alexander also wanted to import the knowledge of Greece and its culture, and make Alexandria the intellectual capital of his new empire. Now, although many people remember Alexander as a great general, he understood that knowledge was power, especially since he himself had been taught by the great philosopher Aristotle, who had also been taught by Plato, who in turn had been taught by Socrates, and last but not least, was a student of the two great ones.
Dust. Wind. Dude.
Alright, fine, maybe I made that last part up. But the point I'm trying to make is that these guys heavily valued independent and critical thinking, to question anything and everything, and Alexander was wise enough to know the benefits of such teachings. So years later, after the founding of Alexandria, Alexander the Great died in 323 BC. His empire would be divided and Egypt would go to his most trusted general, Ptolemy, who was also crowned pharaoh. Ptolemy would continue his predecessor's work, and schools of learning in science, medicine, astronomy, and physics began to appear throughout the city. And then Ptolemy's legacy, the world's first research center, was constructed, and that was the Great Library of Alexandria. Its goal was to seek out every book in the known world, copy it, and then store it in this library. They took it so seriously that any traveler coming into Alexandria, whether it be by land or sea, would be searched for books, and if any were found, they would be confiscated. These books would then be painstakingly copied by scribes over many generations, and because of this, these books would eventually be the only copies to survive over the years. The library would house books of science, medicine, poetry, history, philosophy, geography, astronomy, and much, much more. As you can imagine, a city harboring all the world's knowledge in one place became a very attractive location for scholars. They would move to Alexandria, use the books at the library to conduct their research, write their own pieces of work, which would then be copied and added to the library. And this continued for centuries, culminating in 500,000 to perhaps even 1,000,000 books. To give you an idea of the great thinkers who lived in Alexandria and did their research at the library, we could look at people such as Eratosthenes, who accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. We could look at Aristarchus, who correctly theorized that the Earth revolved around the Sun nearly 2,000 years before Copernicus did. We could look at Archimedes, one of the ancient world's finest mathematicians, who refined and developed his principles of water displacement as a result of studying in Alexandria. And there were so many more examples I could give. However, one event would nearly destroy everything that the Ptolemy dynasty had preserved. It was during the reign of Queen Cleopatra when the glory of the Great Library began to fade. In 46 BC, Cleopatra was fighting a civil war with her brother Ptolemy XIII when a Roman general called Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. She was able to seduce Caesar to join her side, and together they took the fight to Ptolemy. Out of the harbour of Alexandria, though, a fierce naval battle took place, and Julius Caesar gave the order to fire his enemy's ships. Unfortunately, the fire spread from the ships to the harbour docks, and ultimately to the Great Library. Thousands of original books were destroyed in the flames, but smaller incarnations of the library survived, like the Serapeum, and were able to preserve enough of the books. Eventually, Egypt was conquered by Rome, and they also kept the tradition of the library going, but under much less enthusiasm compared to the Ptolemy dynasty. The new management meant less funding, but the scholarly spirit of Alexandria was still kept alive. But if you jump forward 400 years later, when the movie begins, and by this point the Serapeum was all that was left of the original library, and its contents need to be protected now more than ever.
This is why we have to take great care of this place. Our library is all that remains of the wisdom of man.
Hypatia was born in Alexandria towards the end of the 4th century. When exactly, we do not know. Some historians believe that it may have been at 355, whilst others argue it was around 370. In fact, most of our knowledge of her comes from the bits and pieces gathered together by historians. What we do know about her is that she was the only daughter of Theon, a Greek scholar and a mathematician, and was generally considered to be one of the most educated men in the city. They had an extremely close bond with one another, and she got from him the same love of learning. From a very early age, Hypatia became fascinated with the subjects her father taught, and she in turn became his star pupil. They would spend countless hours discussing the mysteries of the universe and debate over the possible answers. Theon wisely recognized this great passion of hers and encouraged it, especially when she began to surpass him in her studies of astronomy, astrology, mathematics, and philosophy. Eventually, it came to a point when Theon instructed Hypatia that she should also teach, which she did exceptionally well. In fact, she was loved by many of her students, and people came from all across the empire to attend her classes and learn from her.
Watch again. Watch again. No, leave it, leave it. So, what mysterious wonder do you all think